On Saturday, October 14th, Bar Harbor Whale Watch left the pier at 9 a.m., circled Mount Desert Island, cruised up Blue Hill Bay, steamed under the Deer Isle Bridge, jetted past Castine and Fort Point State Park, ducked under the Penobscot Narrows Bridge, and motored up the Penobscot River all the way to the Joshua Chamberlain Bridge in Bangor. The return trip covered the other side of Deer Isle Stonington Peninsula, wound past Swans Island and the Cranberry Isles, crossed Frenchman's Bay to Winter Harbor, and covered 160 miles total. It took us 9 hours. It's only going to take you 1. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. Once again, we're on board the Bar Harbor Whale Watch, the Friendship 5, a big, fast catamaran, the only boat in Maine that is capable of doing this trip with hundreds of people on board. We did it last year, and this radio show is hosting again this year. And this year, we're making the trip during the height of foliage season. Take a seat, because here we go. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Napa Auto Parts, EBS, and, of course, Bar Harbor Whale Watch. One voice you'll hear a lot is Chief Naturalist Zach Cliver.
We're very excited. We've done this trip before, but we've done it in the summer, and so we're excited to do it now in the fall. A lot of people said that they want to do this tour in the fall because we realize the river is so decorated in hardwood trees that the photography and foliage should be spectacular.
Captain Matt is at the helm.
Right now, winds are out of the west-southwest, right around 10 knots or so. We do expect that to build a little bit today. We're expecting about a 2 to 3 foot sea through most of today's trip. We're not going to be going offshore. We'll be protected from islands and mainland, so we should have a pretty good, comfortable tour today.
And in fact, the first 30 minutes of the trip were the bumpiest. We did get in the lee of the islands, and it was a very smooth trip the rest of the way. The day was mostly overcast, with some sun poking through by afternoon. Wind was from the south, so the day was warmer than average for mid-October. Foliage was maybe a little less than average due to the hot, dry conditions we've all seen this autumn. Visibility, better than 20 miles. It was a good day for the trip.
Okay, well, again, good morning, everyone. Good morning to everybody that's up here on the top of the boat. How's everyone doing? Good? Okay. What people down below don't know is that we have a jacuzzi up here and a bar. And, wow, this is the place to be. No, just kidding. Well, again, my name is Zach, and I'll be roaming around the boat. I'm an employee of Bar Harbor Whale Watch, so I'm kind of playing host in that way. But our true host, the person who is going to be running things here from the top of the boat, we're very excited to have Bob Duchesne here. You may know he's a representative, Maine representative, and he runs a radio show, Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on 92.9, and it's a terrific program. He goes all over the state and interviews people about the outdoors and the environment. And he also has been very active in developing Schoodic Institute here with Acadia National Park and leading extended eco tours all across Maine, especially helping develop bird watching in the state of Maine and help develop the Maine Birding Trail, right, all through Maine. So we're very happy to have him here. We have quite a few guides on board here, but I think I'll start with Bob and just let him have a chance to say hello to you. Great.
Hi, everybody. My name is Bob Duchesne. I do host a radio show called Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine, so I'm going to need all of you to sign releases. And as Zach mentioned, I am sort of a bird expert, which on a Lighthouse tour is pretty useless knowledge. But I will be pointing out a few things as we encounter them. I'm certainly expecting to see a lot of interesting birds, and I'm sure we'll see some harbor porpoises and some seals as well. And from the top deck, all of us will be keeping our eyes open for that. So I'm glad to have you on board. Thank you for coming.
Okay, also we're very fortunate to have with us today Jeremy D'Entremont, who's here on the top of the boat. He's our Lighthouse historian, and he's the author of many books, and now, again, the director of the American Lighthouse Foundation. Is that right? President. Okay, he's the president of the American and historian of the American Lighthouse Foundation. We're going to stop at each lighthouse for 8 or 10 minutes, and we'll spin the boat around and make sure we get in position to get a lot of excellent photographs.
And that is why we actually zoom right past our first lighthouse, Egg Rock. We've got 2 challenges on this trip: squeezing everything in, which means having an even number of lighthouse stops before and after lunch, and getting each lighthouse in the best light possible for photography. The ones that are on the south or western shores are going to face the sunlight in the afternoon, so we'll save those for later. This brings us right down the shoreline of Acadia National Park, a drive that I'm sure you've done about 1,000 times. But getting the view from the water is pretty cool, and getting the history is even better.
Okay, so that's Old Soaker on our left. Again, Great Head is on our right here. Great Head was purchased by J.P. Morgan along with Sand Beach for his daughter as a wedding present in the early 1900s. Her married last name was Satterley, and Mrs. Satterley donated this land to the park in the 1950s. Over here on the right side now at about 3 o'clock, you've got Champlain Mountain, the Beehive, and Sand Beach, a very pretty picture there setting up for you. And then coming up just ahead of us here, we have Gorham Mountain, and the foliage is really beautiful here along this stretch. And then, of course, all this shoreline is the Ocean Drive section of the Park Loop Road. So just ahead of us, we have Thunder Hole, and up there at 12 o'clock, we've got Otter Cliffs. And so we'll go slowly along this shore so you can take in some of the beauty of Acadia National Park.
Which is what we do. Once past Otter Cliffs, Captain Matt puts the hammer down and we zip over to our first lighthouse stop at Bear Island. This is an old lighthouse, and yet as many times as you've been in Acadia, you probably have never seen it, because it's on the side of the island that faces away from the mainland. Jeremy D'Entremont.
Okay, we got our first lighthouse right here on our right now, and some nice light far. This is Bear Island Light. Very pretty lighthouse. This lighthouse was established in 1839, but the structure, the keeper's house and tower you see here today, was built in 1889. The lighthouse is 31 feet tall, but because it's on this high island, the light is 100 feet above mean high water here. This island, Bear Island, is about 11 acres. It's one of the islands here, one of the island group known as the Cranberry Isles. Some people think the name of the island, Bear Island, actually comes or that it was originally B-A-R-E Island rather than B-E-A-R, and that it comes from the fact that the island used to be treeless when approaching from the west. It's far from treeless now, as you can see, but it probably was originally B-A-R-E Island, probably not named for actual bears on the island. Somme Sound, this is right at the entrance to Somme Sound here, and Somme Sound was an important harbor of refuge for many years, and that's why Congress appropriated $3,000 for a lighthouse here in 1838. Went into service in the following year. It was originally a wooden tower on the roof of a small stone keeper's house. This was always a family light station with one keeper living here with his family, and this was a pretty nice place to live, even though it is an offshore lighthouse. Pretty handy to the mainland, and certainly a lot more comfortable than some of the more remote offshore lighthouses. Lighthouse keeping appointments in the early 1800s were very political. It really depended on who you knew and what political party you supported, and that was very much true here. The first keeper was named John Bowen. He was fired after 3 years as keeper in 1842. It was reported that he was fired for, quote, interference in elections both under the late and present administrations and absence from the lighthouse for days in succession. But he got his job back a couple of years later. He was keeper for another 6 years because the political winds changed. Then he was fired again for political reasons, came back a third time for a couple of years. So he had 3 separate stints as keeper. There was a bad fire to the original lighthouse building in 1852. The station was subsequently rebuilt, and there was a brick tower at one end of the dwelling, similar to the structure you see here today. There was a keeper named Caleb Gould for some years in the 1850s, and he had a number of children. I'm not sure how many, but several children. There was another family living on the island, and for a while they actually declared it a separate school district. They had a small schoolroom on the island, and keeper Caleb Gould was the teacher at the schoolhouse, and school was taught off and on Bear Island for the rest of the 1800s. In 1888, they installed a 1,000-pound fog bell here and striking apparatus. The keeper would have to wind that up in times of poor visibility. So if you couldn't see the light, you'd at least hear the clang of that bell, which would help tell you your location. This lighthouse you see here today, again, was built in 1889. along with this 1.5-story wood frame house that you see here, all built in around 1889, 1890, a number of outbuildings as well. Also, for a time beginning in 1887, Bear Island had a buoy depot. They maintained navigational aids here. That buoy was later transferred to Southwest Harbor, and there was a coal station here. So buoy tenders would stop here and refuel right here at Bear Island. There was a keeper named Elmo Turner who was here in the 1930s for some years. And like many lighthouse families, the Turner family kept chickens and a cow here at Bear Island. There was no electricity, so they kept their milk and cream in the cellar. And one day the cow had to be taken to the mainland, so Keeper Turner put his cow in the dory and rowed his cow across to Northeast Harbor, then rowed her back to the island. And he reported that the cow got seasick on the return trip. So I would say you haven't lived to share a rowboat with a seasick cow.
A lot has happened since the seasick cow. The light was discontinued in the early 1980s, fell into pretty bad disrepair, and eventually came into the hands of Friends of Acadia in 1989. It's now owned by the National Park, but leased to a private couple. The light has been replaced by a modern lantern and is now operated as a private aid to navigation. This is the Bar Harbor Whale Watch Tour that ran up the Penobscot River last weekend, hosted by Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. Today, we're on the Friendship 5, a big, fast catamaran operated by Bar Harbor Whale Watch. Once a year, they make an all-day trip around Mount Desert Island, past Deer Isle and Castine, and up the Penobscot River in Bangor. We did it last weekend. Now, just before the break, Lighthouse interpreter Jeremy D'Entremont had just finished telling us about our first light on Bear Island, and he was handing the microphone to me.
Once again, this is Bob Duchesne from the top deck. While you're admiring the lighthouse, the observant members of the audience might have noticed some common loons out here. I've seen at least 14 since we left the dock. There was one just off the starboard side of the boat around 3 o'clock a moment ago. The red buoy that's about 1 o'clock, there was a couple loons out there. And people have been asking me, is it common to see loons in the ocean? And the answer is absolutely. They're equally comfortable on both. There's a lot of food over here, so they come over here to feed. The young ones don't even go inland very much because they don't want to compete for territory with the older loons who would simply beat the snot out of them. So it's very common to see loons on the ocean. 14 so far this morning is actually a big number for me. I wasn't expecting that many so quickly.
All right, we're slowing down here as we get close to our next lighthouse, just ahead of us on the left here. This is the Blue Hill Bay Light, commonly called Blue Hill Bay Light. It is on Green Island, and Green Island is not too far from the mainland. The town of Brooklyn ahead of us, with the island in between Green Island and the mainland is Fly Island. Green Island here is only about 3/4 of an acre at high tide, about 3 times that, more than 2 acres at low tide. And it is here at the western edge of Blue Hill Bay. This light was established in 1857, largely because the town of Ellsworth to the north of Blue Hill Bay was a leading lumber port, and they felt they needed a light station here to guide vessels through Blue Hill Bay. Congress appropriated $6,000 for this lighthouse in 1854. And the land was sold by Abraham Fly. The Fly family was very prominent around here. The island was sold to the government for $150. The light was established in 1857. It also helped to guide mariners through the eastern end of Eggemoggin Reach. We'll be going through Eggemoggin Reach. Pumpkin Island Light is at the northwestern end of the reach. We'll be seeing that. Eggemoggin Reach connects Penobscot Bay with Blue Hill Bay. In its early years, this lighthouse was often referred to as Eggemoggin Light. I've also seen it referred to as Edgemoggin Light. The early keepers had a hand-operated fog bell here to signal passing vessels in fog, but eventually they put a more substantial fog bell with striking machinery, again, that the keeper had to wind up in times of poor visibility. Of course, if you lived at a lighthouse like this, Certainly lobster was a staple of your diet, and certainly fish. There was a keeper named Roscoe Chandler here in the 1920s. It was noted that he and his family, during one camping trip in the 1920s, I think this was just a couple of days, they caught almost 300 pounds of cod, hake, and cusk nearby. And they also shot a lot of ducks, so duck was a staple of their diet as well. Roscoe Chandler, that keeper who was here in the 20s, also owned a farm on the mainland in the town of Monroe, several miles away. Two of his children, Catherine and Everett, lived at the farm in Monroe, and they attended school there. Once when they were in their early teens, they obtained a cow at Monroe and walked the cow all the way from Monroe to the light station. And it is possible to walk out to Green Island at low tide. I know because I've done it. Along the way, they stopped at farms along the way. They swapped milk from their cow for lodging and meals. There's a seal near us?
Harbor, dead ahead, 12 o'clock, on that rock.
Harbor seal, oh yeah, harbor seal. Oh, there, yeah, I think it's just, is it going in the water?
Yeah.
Yeah, harbor seal on the rock just ahead of us here. Eventually, they had two cows pastured on Fly Island nearby here, and they would walk over to the Fly Island to milk the cows at low tide, but at high tide, you had to take the boat over to milk the cows. They didn't have a telephone here until quite late in the game, and the families would use interesting methods of communication. When Keeper Chandler was needed on shore, a woman on the mainland would hang a black suit outside her house as a signal, and he would know he needed to go ashore. In 1933, an automatic light on a skeleton tower replaced this lighthouse. This lighthouse has not been an active lighthouse since 1933, and at that time the property was sold into private hands. It's been sold several times since then. It is currently for sale. It was $850,000. It is now for sale for $650,000.
What happens next in Eggemogan Reach is beyond astonishing, at least to me. We're not far from passing under the Deer Isle Bridge, so let's pick it up with Zach Cliver.
We have Deer Isle on our left side right now, and we are going to go under the bridge that connects the mainland to Deer Isle. Right up ahead of us now, you can see the Deer Island Thoroughfare Bridge. Really beautiful bridge, so that'll be another opportunity to get photographs coming up. In just a few minutes, we'll be passing under that bridge. And then down at the far end of this channel, there's the Pumpkin Island Light, and that's our next stop. And that is a really beautiful lighthouse that is coming up here.
You may notice, front of the boat in the distance, there's a large flock of dark birds swirling around out there. I'm guessing those are black scoters, which are a little smaller than the white-winged scoters we saw earlier. Oh, the nearest one is a surf scoter, which has a white patch in the back of the head and on the forehead. There is a lot of these birds out here. Scoters as far as the eye can see. Most of these have just come down from subarctic in Canada. We do have some that linger over the summer, but not many.
Scoters are 3 species of sea ducks that nest in northern Canada. They winter in the Gulf of Maine and point south along the eastern coast of the United States. What I'm seeing is beyond anything I've seen before. Thousands of scoters, mostly surf scoters, sitting in the water and just swirling in the air above it. We can get hundreds flocking together in Maine in the winter, but this is the first time I've seen thousands do it. Amazing. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. Saturday mornings at 9, Sunday mornings at 8 on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. Last weekend, Bar Harbor Whale Watch conducted its annual trip from Bar Harbor to Bangor, stopping at 10 lighthouses along the way. We've just now crossed under the Deer Isle Bridge. Jeremy D'Entremont is president of the American Lighthouse Foundation, and we couldn't have a better guide.
All right, we're slowing down here at the Pumpkin Island Lighthouse dead ahead of us here. And this is another one of the prettiest lighthouses, I would say, on the Maine coast. And it is at the northwestern entrance to Eggemogan Reach, which we are just coming out of. And it is a short distance offshore from Little Deer Island, Little Deer Isle on our left here. By the way, the name Agamogan Reach, in case you're wondering where that name came from, it sounds like it might be something you get for breakfast at McDonald's, but it actually was a local Indian word which was said to mean place of the great fish weir. So this was established by Congress for $3,500 in 1852. Light went into service in 1855, January 1st, 1855. It's a round brick tower. The tower is only about 20 feet tall to the deck of the lantern. It's obviously not real tall, 28 feet tall in all to the very top. This lighthouse was one of the first in the United States to get a Fresnel lens, one of the earliest ones in Maine. Those of you who are lighthouse buffs know about Fresnel lenses, the beautiful glass lenses made of multiple prisms, mostly made in France. This one no longer has a lens. This has not been an active lighthouse since 1933. It was deactivated at the same time as the Blue Hill Bay Lighthouse, the last one we saw. The first keeper here was a man named John Chester Tibbets. His pay was $350 a year, which was pretty typical at that time in the mid-1800s. You didn't get rich being a lighthouse keeper. It wasn't terrible pay, but it wasn't that good either. It was pretty much a middle class or lower middle class salary. John Chester Tibbets, the man who was the first keeper, was also the same man who had sold the island to the government. He was here until 1861, and he was a longtime sea captain before he became a lighthouse keeper. He later ran a store in Brooklyn for many years and was postmaster and deacon of the local Baptist church. Later there was a keeper named Charles Leroy Babson, also from Brooklyn. He was keeper here from 1870 to 1902, 32 years. He was a Civil War veteran. He had been shot at the Battle of Fredericksburg, shot in the leg, and his leg was amputated. He was a one-legged lighthouse keeper, which was not that unusual. There were actually quite a few after the Civil War. Quite a few wounded war veterans were given lighthouse keeping appointments as favors. So there were a number of one-legged and some one-armed lighthouse keepers. Obviously, it helped that this wasn't a super tall lighthouse for him to climb up and down. It's an interesting story about when he was wounded. He was actually pronounced dead, but a nurse saw movement in one of his fingers and he was revived. So he barely survived the Civil War.
The lighthouse was discontinued in 1933, and it's now in private hands, as is our next lighthouse, Dice Head in Castine. That's where we also have lunch, and if I have one complaint about this tour, it's that Bar Harbor Whale Watch overfed us. Clam chowder, a variety of sandwiches, cookies, snacks. I don't want to say I gained weight on this cruise, but every time I walked to one side of the boat, it would list that way.
As I was mentioning, this became a major port in the 1800s. Actually, it was also a shipbuilding center for many years, and there was a lot of lumber traffic on the Penobscot River here. So it was decided that a light station should be established here, again on the east side of the entrance of the Penobscot River in 1828. Congress appropriated $5,000 for the lighthouse, and they chose the southernmost point of the Castine Peninsula here, Dice Head. It is a conical rubble stone tower. It's 51 feet tall. The light is 129 feet above mean high water here, since it's on a high bluff here. A lot of our early lighthouses had bad problems in the early 1800s with leaks and all kinds of problems. They were just poorly built. This is one of quite a few lighthouses that you would call a rubble stone tower, just made of local stone. It's been shored up over the years, but it did have problems with leaks in its early days. In fact, for a while, starting in the late 1850s, they surrounded this lighthouse with wooden sheathing. They actually put like an octagonal wooden sheath around it. So if you see some of the early photos of this lighthouse, it looks like an octagonal wooden lighthouse because they put that wooden sheath around it. They had a 1,000-pound fog bell here for many years, which was actually rung by hand by the keeper in response to signals from passing vessels. If it was foggy and a passing vessel rang its bell, the keeper had to go out and sound the bell to help the mariners hopefully figure out where they were by recognizing that sound. Maritime traffic fell off here. The lighthouse was discontinued in 1935. It was replaced by a skeleton tower closer to shore. That skeleton tower is now gone, but the light on the skeleton tower served for many years. The lighthouse tower was hit by lightning in 1952. Windows and a door were blown out. There was a lot of damage, but that was fixed. And in 1956, the lighthouse itself was turned over to the town of Castine. The tower fell into disrepair, and then in the late 1990s, the town hired a contractor. They actually injected what they called slurry to fill in the cracks in the lighthouse and left it in very good shape. In 2007, September 2007, there was a microburst. I'm sure a lot of you know about microbursts. Downward winds, very strong winds, toppled the skeletal tower that held the navigational light at that time. And a few weeks later, the Coast Guard announced that they would put a light back on the lighthouse. Instead of rebuilding the skeletal tower, they decided to basically restore the lighthouse as an aid to navigation. So a modern acrylic type optic was put in the back in the lantern of the lighthouse, and it was relighted as an aid to navigation after 72 years in darkness. So it is an active lighthouse again.
We've got just enough time to squeeze in one more lighthouse before we get up to the Penobscot Narrows Bridge and head up the river to Bangor. Once again, Jeremy D'Entremont is our lighthouse guide.
Hey, we're getting near the Fort Point Lighthouse here. Right in front of us, we have beautiful skies and beautiful light for Fort Point Lighthouse. Another very, very pretty light station here, one that I've visited many times over the years. This is in the town of Stockton Springs. Stockton Springs was a lumber port, shipping point for the potato industry, another big industry in Maine. It's on a point of land here called Cape Jellison, which is the southernmost portion of Stockton Springs. The docks here at Cape Jellison were once considered among the longest wooden docks in the world. They had a 600-foot-long shed here that held 240,000 barrels of potatoes at one time. And again, this was a major shipping point for potatoes. And the port here was linked to the Bangor and Aroostook Railroad. The lighthouse here is at the eastern corner of the Cape, which, as you can see, juts out here into the Penobscot River. Fort Point gets its name from Fort Pownall, which was built by order of Massachusetts Governor Thomas Pownall in 1759. The light station was established here in 1836. It was Maine's first light station on a river, and the original stone tower and keeper's house here were very poorly built, and as a result it was rebuilt in the 1850s. The lighthouse is here today, was finished in 1857, and it still has its fourth order Fresnel lens from 1857. The lighthouse itself is brick, square as you can see, and 31 feet tall. The light is 88 feet above the water. The bell tower you see over to the right was added in 1890, and there you see the barn next to the lighthouse and keeper's house. So pretty much all the structures that were built here for this light station, also an oil house over to the left, all these structures are still standing, which makes this one of the best preserved light stations in New England. This was a very sought-after station. It was considered a very comfortable place for a keeper and his family. A total of only 4 men served as keeper here from 1882 to 1952. So it was automated in 1988. The last keeper left here, and this eventually became a state park. This is one of 8 main light stations that still have their so-called classical Fresnel lenses still in use.
And with that, we'll take a break and then do the Penobscot River portion of today's Bar Harbor Whale Watch journey, an annual trip around Mount Desert Island and all the way up to Bangor. It takes the whole day to do the 160-mile round trip, but we're squeezing it into 1 hour of Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. This is Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket with Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. Once a year, Bar Harbor Whale Watch takes one of its fast catamarans on a tour from Bar Harbor to Bangor, stopping at 10 lighthouses along the way. That trip occurred last weekend, and I got to MC the event, which was cool. At this point, we've just crossed under the Penobscot Narrows Bridge, and as we make the turn towards Bucksport, there is Fort Knox. You remember that during the American Revolution and again during the War of 1812, the British sailed up the Penobscot to exterminate American naval resistance. Congress was determined that there would never be a third time, and some fortifications were built. Fort Knox was the cornerstone, but it was never completed. Early in the American Civil War, it was never too clear if the Brits would side with the Confederacy, so work continued in that fort for 25 years. However, the Civil War brought the invention of rifled cannon, which had longer range and more power. That made stone fortifications obsolete. Ruth Eaton volunteers at the fort and is one of the friends of Fort Knox who now supervise this piece of Maine's history, and she can tell us what the gunnery situation was when that war broke out.
Well, the fort itself wasn't finished. The shoreline batteries, which is here to your left, had 34 cannons. The battery B on the right-hand side had 15 cannons. So it had very ample defense for any ship to come up the river. It might change its mind. It was actually sold, the federal government sold it to the state of Maine in the 1920s, became a historic site, and opened as a state park in 1943.
Okay, we have the city of Bucksport right ahead of us here, and we are now going to venture up the Penobscot River. It's 109 miles long, but if you include the west branch and the south branch of the river, it increases the length of the river to 264 miles, making it the second largest or longest river system in Maine. We will look for wildlife. We'll be looking for bald eagles, river otter, deer, birds of prey on migration, and sea ducks of different kinds as we head toward Bangor. There should be some beautiful fall foliage along the way now, and Bob Duchesne will be calling things out, calling out wildlife as we see it as we travel up the Penobscot.
And if that isn't a jinx, I don't know what is. Over the next mile, the crew spotted 3 eagles, and I didn't see a one of them.
There's a bald eagle at 2 o'clock flying over the tree line going toward 3. It's about 50 feet up in the air off the trees flying. Now it's coming towards the boat. Turn, coming back this direction. It's now, again, at 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock.
Now, to my credit, I did spot the 4th one, sitting across the river from Hamlin's Marine in Hamden.
There is an eagle sitting right here on the right, sitting midway up a tree just at 3 o'clock in the bank. Just look for that golf ball, and when you find that white spot, there's an eagle under it. Directly at 3 o'clock, only halfway up the tree in an exposed branch. Well, I spotted an eagle. My work is done here. Now, the flock of ducks is crossing right in front of us, winging downriver, go right by the boat in a moment. And here they come. They're going to duck around the corner.
The river part of the cruise is one of the best parts, but it's also one of the quietest. Unlike lighthouses and forts, you've got to be pretty observant to see the history here. Now and then you can see pilings with the booms used to control the flow of logs going downriver. You can see the remains of piers just barely sticking above the mud. Maybe the hulk of an old vessel that came to rest on the bank. Really, the best part of this trip is just seeing the Penobscot River from a completely different perspective. You know what you can see from the road, but the river is just another world. It starts when you pass the wide section of river in Frankfort and Prospect. As it narrows, the river passes through forest, with just occasional houses poking in a view from the ridges above. You round a bend, and there is Winterport. Then the river closes in around you again until you get up to Hamden and Orrington. Even though you're passing through several towns on each side of the river, you really don't see much until you get up to the middle of Orrington.
So especially for the local folks who've never seen it from this side, that's the Penobscot Energy Recovery Corporation right there, PERC, which is a waste-to-energy incinerator. I believe all the work ahead of us right now on the shoreline is probably Mercury Reclamation Project. This is where Holtrachem used to be, and this area was contaminated severely by mercury. That eventually went to trial, and I testified in it. You're welcome.
As much fun as it is to take a huge whale watch catamaran up the Penobscot River all the way to the Joshua Chamberlain Bridge, I can only imagine what people strolling along the Bangor waterfront must be thinking.
If there's anyone on the waterfront that can hear us, we're lost. Is this the way to Cleveland? Coming up on our left, that's the Sea Dog Restaurant. It's a brew pub. We'll be stopping there. The first round is on Zach.
I'm kidding, of course. They've got beer and wine on this boat. And what they really do at this point is pass out more cookies. Good Lord, how many cookies did they bring? We're going to head back down the river, and in fact, during the break, we're going to go all the way to our next lighthouse, which is all the way down on Eagle Island in Penobscot Bay. Meet you there in about 3 minutes. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. Welcome back to Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. We're on board the Friendship 5, a Bar Harbor Whale Watch boat that did a unique trip around Mount Desert Island through Blue Hill Bay and up the Penobscot River to Bangor, visiting 10 lighthouses along the way. Earlier this year, this show was on board for a Grand Slam lighthouse tour up the coast, and the last 2 lighthouses we hit during that tour on the air were Winter Harbor Light and Egg Rock in Bar Harbor. So we won't repeat those 2 on this show. We'll wrap up with these 3. Jeremy D'Entremont is president of the American Lighthouse Foundation, and he's our lighthouse guide as we pull up to Eagle Island.
All right, so I'll give you a little background here on Eagle Island Lighthouse. This is another early rubblestone lighthouse, much looks a lot like Dice Head Light that we saw a little while ago, built about 11 years after Dice Head Light. This one was built in 1839. Eagle Island here is a pretty substantial island. It's about 260 acres, and it is in the channel that was followed by many vessels heading into the Penobscot River. And as as has been talked about quite a bit today, when Bangor was such a busy lumber port, they appropriated money for a light station here on Eagle Island in 1837. And they built this 30-foot tall rubblestone tower. Again, it went into service in 1839. This, even though it's an island light station, this was considered a pretty desirable assignment for a lighthouse keeper because there was a pretty substantial community, especially in the summer here, and it's not too far from the mainland. Could be pretty harsh in the winter, but beautiful in the summer. There are beaches on this, on this island, freshwater springs, wild strawberries, cranberries, raspberries. Sounds pretty good to me. Sign me up for the summer, but not for the winter. And of course, again, the families who lived here would keep a cow and some chickens at the station, typically. The children of the lighthouse keepers were homeschooled here until about 1870, when they established a small school on the island because there were a number of families on the island. The state took over operation of the school eventually, but sometimes they didn't have enough kids to operate the school. They needed at least 5 children to keep the school in operation. This lighthouse had a 4th order Fresnel lens for quite a few years. It was installed in 1858. John Ball, a local sea captain, was one of the better-known keepers here. He became keeper in 1883. He was captain of a square-rigged ship by the time he was 23 years old and captained many ships before he became a lighthouse keeper. And then when he retired after 15 years here in 1898, his son Howard followed him as a keeper. Howard Ball remained keeper for another 15 years, so it was basically a family dynasty of the Ball family here for about 30 years. 5 of the 9 children of keeper Howard Ball and his wife Lucy were born here at the light station. They established a gigantic 4,200-pound fog bell here, bronze bell, 4,200 pounds in 1935. That is unusually large. I mean, most fog bells were around 1,000 pounds. You see the old fog bell tower, which still stands here, minus its bell. The light here was automated in 1959. It was the bell was essentially replaced by an offshore bell buoy. In February 1964, a Coast Guard crew came out of Rockland. They demolished all the buildings. Again, just leaving the lighthouse and bell tower standing and traces of the old foundations. When they tried to move the giant 4,200-pound fog bell, they lost control of it. It went bouncing over the cliff into the ocean.
Yeah, I hate when that happens. Next up, Stonington, and it doesn't take long to get there.
Okay, we are right in front of Deer Island Thoroughfare Lighthouse here on Mark Island, sometimes referred to as Mark Island Lighthouse. This is one of the few stations that still has a 24-hour foghorn, so you hear that foghorn going. There you go. So this light station was established in 1858. It's a 25-foot tall brick lighthouse. The light is 52 feet above the water. And this one is another one that I think has recently been converted to a VLB 44 LED optic. A lot of these have been converted to LEDs just in the past year. Quite a few of them have been switched to that. It is a flashing white light every 6 seconds at night, and this fog signal is one blast every 15 seconds. So you might want to check and see if it's running properly here every 15 seconds. The reason the light was established here is that Deer Island Thoroughfare, this waterway, was a busy waterway in the 1800s. There are a lot of granite quarries in the area, including quarries on some of the islands. Also a lot of fishing around here. This island, Mark Island, is about a mile offshore from Stonington at the west entrance to the Deer Island Thoroughfare. They established the money for this in 1856. The island was purchased for $175, and they built the lighthouse. It went into operation the beginning of 1858. There was an early keeper here named Samuel Holden from Deer Isle. He was disabled in the Civil War. He became keeper here in 1868. His wife was here with him, Melissa Colby Holden, I should say. Samuel Holden died, the keeper here, Samuel Holden, died in 1874, and his wife, Melissa Colby Holden, won the appointment to replace him as keeper. That was a fairly common thing. A lot of wives learned how to take care of the lights. You always wanted more than one person in a household to know how to do the job in case the keeper was incapacitated or died suddenly or was detained away or something like that. So Melissa Holden replaced her husband as keeper when he died, and there's some stories about her. They say that the custom at that time was to keep the place settings on the fully set dining table covered with a cloth between meals. They would put a cloth over all the place settings. Melissa Holden, the keeper here, also put a loaded pistol under the cloth on our dining room table. And if a stranger landed at the island, she would stay near the table and near her gun that was concealed under that cloth. Luckily, she never had to use the gun, but it was reported that one time she emptied a chamber pot on the heads of some unlucky intruders. I think I'd prefer the gun, actually.
We'll stop at one more lighthouse, a famous one. You've been there. But before we get there, I did manage to grab one more unusual bird for the crowd, the largest bird in the Gulf of Maine.
A northern gannet has just crossed the bow going left to right. It's now at about 2 o'clock, really low to the water. An adult northern gannet. I've been looking for that little bugger. Northern gannets nest in huge colonies. There's one in Newfoundland, there's one in the Gaspé Peninsula, Quebec. The non-breeders are going back and forth in the Gulf of Maine quite a bit during the summer, so we see them regularly. And then after they leave their nesting colonies, we can see a big stream of them going southbound.
Finally, here we are, one of the most photographed lighthouses in the state of Maine, Bass Harbor Headlight.
So this, as you can see plainly, this is still an active light. It's on 24 hours a day. It's got what they call an occulting red light. Occulting red 4 seconds is the characteristic. 3 seconds red, alternating with 1 second of darkness. And this is another one of the 8 lighthouses in the state of Maine that still has a Fresnel lens, a classical Fresnel lens, glass lens, in this case surrounded by a red acrylic cylinder that gives it the red color. So this lighthouse and Fort Point, which we saw earlier, 2 of the 8 lighthouses in Maine out of 66 lighthouses in Maine, give or take a couple depending on how you count them. 2 of the 8 that still have Fresnel lenses. This lighthouse was recommended in 1855, and Congress appropriated a sum of $5,000. This is 32 feet tall, made of brick, and it went into service in 1858, September 1st, 1858. Its primary purpose was to warn mariners of the Bass Harbor Bar, the eastern entrance to Bass Harbor, and also to mark the southeast entrance to Blue Hill Bay. This was a family station, another station where one keeper lived with his family, and again, it was a pretty comfortable place to live compared to some of the really remote offshore lights. The original 5th order Fresnel lens here was replaced by a 4th order lens, which is the one you still see here today in 1901. So this lens has been in place in this lighthouse since 1901. Manufactured by the Henri Lepaute Company in Paris, one of the big manufacturers of Fresnel lenses. Most of our Fresnel lenses in this country came from France. The vast majority did, about something like 75%. We also had quite a few Chance Brothers lenses from England, and a small number of lenses made in this country by the Macbeth Glass Company in Pittsburgh, PA, but the vast majority of our lenses came from France. According to a book called Anchor to Windward, this lighthouse is one of several in Maine that for a while had what I like to call a fog dog, much like the ones at Owl's Head. Owl's Head had a famous fog dog, Spot. Some of you may know about him, or Sailor at the Wood Island Lighthouse down off Biddeford. The keeper's dog here around 1940 would take the rope in his teeth, the rope hanging from the fog bell, and he would ring the bell and reply to salutes from the Maine Seacoast Mission boat, Sunbeam. Very famous vessel. So one of several fog dogs on the coast.
Okay, before the show goes completely to the dogs, we'll wrap it up. We just barely squeezed a 9-hour adventure into 1 hour of Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. We'll be back next Saturday morning at 9, Sunday morning at 8, and online afterwards at 929theticket.com. Brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Napa Auto Parts, Bar Harbor Whale Watch, and EBS. This is Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket.